All right, I got everything, I think. I think we're all set if I don't trip over my cords. So tonight we will talk about the Beads of Courage project. For our newer members, this is something we do pretty much every year here for the last several years. I think we missed during COVID because they weren't accepting donations. But the Beads of Courage project for us means a donation to the Stead Family Children's Hospital up in Iowa City. And for those not familiar with the Beads project, it's a program where they have artistic beads that are given to the patients at the Children's Hospital every time they go through a procedure. So if a kid's going in, having an x-ray, having a surgery, having chemo, every time they have a treatment, they're given a bead, which is referred to as a bead of courage. A lot of them string those together, make giant beads. Some of them collect, make other items out of them, play with them, etc. But it's just a little thing for the kids to earn a badge of honor, if you will, as they go through their numerous treatments. Over time, those kids, especially, there's some really sick kids up there that collect a lot of those beads. And if you have any children or grandchildren of your own, you know that when kids start collecting things, next thing you know, they're everywhere. So for the club, what we do is give them something to put those beads in and to house them. And so we call them boxes. They can be flat work, they can be cylinders like these. It's just a place for them to store those items. Should the child succumb to their illness, and the family oftentimes will use those as a keepsake box. So that's kind of the project. It's something that I'm proud to be involved in. I think the club members gives you kind of a sense of doing something good for someone. If you would like to donate, we take those up after the April meeting. So typically everybody brings them in by the April meeting. If you want them critiqued, we'll critique them. If not, we'll just take them up there. I'm not sure who's going to do that in years past. Bob Madison, myself, Dan Gascoigne have taken them up there. So I'll just, as we walk through this here tonight, I'm going to do a little other couple things, shamelessly promote the club if we can. This first photo that I have up here is really nothing to do with the Beads of Courage project, but it's a photo of my messy shop and the video equipment that the club has available to every one of you. So if you want to do a demo in the future, but you think your demo is too involved to do in an hour time slot up here, you can certainly, believe me, it took more than an hour to make these. You can take this equipment home. If you need a little assistance, I can't guarantee that I'll be there with you all the time to film, but I'll show you how to use the equipment so that you can make your own presentation if you want to bring it in here. We used this several times during COVID, and then hasn't really been used since very much. So I took it home, and over the course of a few weekends, I used this equipment. But there's 3 cameras in there. There's let's see here. There's these 3 little cameras here. There is some rigging that goes up above so that you can position that stuff over your lathe, or as you'll see, over your table saw. The club has a laptop, the club's little video switcher, everything you need. There's a wireless mic set up just like we use here that you can take home if you want to narrate what you're doing. We have all the equipment for you, so anybody who's interested, I'm happy to show you how to use that stuff. That's what we have it for. So if you're going to make a beads box, they have some guidelines. I printed off about 20 copies of this. It's sitting on the counter over there behind Steve's Center. On the size diameter that they would prefer. As you can see here, it says interior 6 inches diameter, at least 5 inches height. Flat work, 4 by 6 by 4. They don't want anything too artistic, I guess. Like if I were to think of Steve Sinner's vases, probably not a good project for that. They're tall and narrow. These are for little hands and families. There's, things that we don't want to tip over easily. The lid that goes on it, oftentimes as wood turners, we want like that tight, snug, precise fit. This is loose, and it's that way by design, and also because I'm not that good. So that's easier for me to do without having to feel like I did something wrong. The finial, again, we were talking about Tyler's finial earlier. That's not the kind of thing we want to give to a small child. These are nothing fancy. They're, easy to grasp. That's the kind of thing. They talk about the finish here. The only thing that I noticed down here is it says refrain from painting the boxes. And I don't know if that's a safety thing or if that's whoever wrote this from the AAW's personal preference. We've had painted ones in the past that look fabulous. So I don't know, but I would not use, anything that you think is toxic or of a type of paint that's not stable and might come off with fingerprint oil or something like that. Make sure that whatever you use is safe. We talked earlier about kids putting things in their mouths. You just never know what's going to happen with these. So just follow those guidelines, and I don't think anybody's going to be too picky beyond that. If you go up to the University of Iowa, they say right in here, no handmade toys, that kind of thing. But this is the University of Iowa's rules. The one thing that the University of Iowa is kind of a stickler about is not identifying yourself beyond a first and last name. So if you had a business card or something with your home address on it, they're going to discard that before they let anybody have that. If you want to write an encouraging note, you're certainly welcome to do that. Just don't put your personal information, phone number, email address, or anything like that, or it will just get discarded. So that's the University of Iowa's guidelines. For the club's purposes, when the board talks about this, both the Beads of Courage and the University of Iowa hospitals have a form that they want you to fill out that says how many boxes, what we value the donation at. I think I just valued them at like $75 per item the last time, just as put whatever you want on there. But they track that for their own stats, grant work, all that kind of stuff. So make sure that whoever does that takes care of that. They only accept those boxes on or any gifts on something like Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. They have like a 2-hour window, so that's kind of specific also. And when you go up there, if you're looking to get a parade or a tour of the facility or anything like that, it's really literally meeting the security people or the receptionist right inside the front doors of the hospital, and they take them from you and say thank you, and you're on your way. So I'll show you a bunch of them that I've done in the past, and I'll tell you, I'm going to show you a couple of real dumb mistakes I made here doing this. And part of that is because I haven't done any turning in, 9 months or so. Last thing I think I made was in May of last year, and then just to be honest with you, life's been in the way, and I've done other things in my shop for sure, but not any wood turning. And it's kind of like, for my law enforcement days, we talked about perishable skills with your firearm all the time, and if you don't practice, you lose it, and that's how I felt doing some of this. So the first one of these I ever made, I didn't have very many accessories. I glued this thing to a big old waste block and had at it, and it actually worked fairly well. So you can certainly do it that way. That was the end result there for the first one that I donated, and that's Yellow Heart and Wenge. So the next one, I got myself some coal jaws, and that worked fairly well also. And if you'll notice that first one, there's two different styles up here, was segmented turning with rings, and then the next one I did in a stave manner. And I learned that stave thing, I think, at a pepper mill demo over in, I forget the name of the town, over in Illinois there, where the train depot is. Anyway, so I made one there with stave construction, and I also figured out that by using those cold jaws, you really want to have a center steady. And that's something I forgot this time. You're going to see how painfully obvious that became to me. So I made myself a center steady. That's just made out of laminated plywood. I was doing this on a MIDI lathe that I just sold to Ed Bruner, by the way. And he got this center steady. But I made that one myself. I don't know that I would make one on a plywood like that on a bigger lathe or on a bigger project. Might not be strong enough for that. So that's the end result of that one. And on this one, on the bottom, I put a little capture ring to hold the plywood bottom in place there. I did not do that on these just because I was really pressed for time. But I think that does give you a little nicer finished look on the bottom. This was not a Beads of Courage box. After I made those others, my sister-in-law saw those and decided she needed one to put her coffee in on her counter. So I made her that one. But it's basically not big enough probably for a beads box based on their size recommendation, but same kind of thing. After I made that one, my wife said, well, now I need one. So this one I decided to try. At that point, I hadn't made any out of solid wood. So I decided, oh, let's try that. I had a couple of big chunks of Jerry Johansson cherry and decided to hollow those out. And I did 2 of those, and one of them has sweetener that we hardly ever use anymore. We pretty much drink our coffee black, and the other one has coffee in it on our countertop. The one interesting thing about these 2 is I tried, I don't know if we can see, yeah, here's the bottom. I did one of them with a plywood bottom, and the other one is just solid wood the whole way. And I was really kind of afraid that solid wood one there, 5-6 inches in diameter, was going to crack at some point, but it never has. It's been still sitting on our counter today. This was just another Beads of Courage box that I made, I think, for the next year. This one is a lot thinner. Worked out okay. I don't know that I would make one that thin again because I was just kind of worried about it being fragile for that purpose. And there's Dan Gascoigne and I dropping them off. That's all that happens when you go up there. Take your own photo if you want to. I think we had to holler at somebody that was unloading their car out there. But when I got into this, trying to decide what to do with this project, when I volunteered for it, it occurred to me that I have a whole lot of scrap wood in my shop, like a whole lot of people probably do, and I hoard way too much and probably should get rid of it. But I've got little pieces, big pieces, thin pieces, fat pieces, all kinds of different things laying around. So I decided to take all those smaller pieces and glue them up and make some bigger boards out of them, and then that's how I came up with the stave design. So the other thing that I stumbled across doing this, and it was just by accident, I don't know if anybody's ever used this stuff or not. It's like super glue, and then it dries really fast. And where's Dan? You were talking about somebody having a different kind of super glue with no odor to it. And I don't know if that's, this is that. I don't know if it's the same thing or not, but it's that criteria that you were talking about with no odor. Dries fast. Says here, better 2 times more durable than super glue, tougher than polyurethane. I don't know about all that, but it worked well for me. It's like $6 at Lowe's, and it's clear. CA glue, I have like some kind of reaction to it where if I use CA hardly at all, for 2 days, I can't hardly breathe and I'm blowing my nose, and it just really shuts me down. So that's available at Menards, or I've seen it at Lowe's and Menards, probably Home Depot, probably anywhere that sells that stuff. But that's what I used to glue in the bottoms on this and to glue in the bead at the top. So let's see, that's all we got for photos. I'll walk you through the process. Before we get much further, what I said I would do, and I will do, is provide some blanks here. A couple of years ago, we really increased our participation in this project. We've gone from as few as maybe 4 boxes to as many as 20 when we take them up there to drop them off. And a couple of years ago, Dan Gascoigne very generously donated probably 8 or 10 cylinders that he made at home. And he did his a little different. He used like a bird's mouth bit on his router table to make his staves. Same thing, and he brought them in here for people. I haven't really talked to the board when I've made kits for segmented bowls in the past, and I think we sold them for $15. I'll cut the wood, I'll bring you the staves. You're gonna see tonight how to put them together. I know I've had 2 people already say that they were interested. I think Tim and Dan. Is there any other people that are interested in those kits if I bring them in? I don't wanna make too many, but I probably have enough scrap wood to make 5 or 6 of them anyway.
I'll do it.
Okay. I'll bring them in probably in the next couple of weeks. I'll drop them by here at some point, and then the board can decide what they want to do with that. And I don't care if you do nothing with it, but I just thought it'd be a good opportunity. I'm always trying to, having been on the board in the past, I know every little bit of money counts, so I was just looking for a way to do that. So to start this off, whether you're gonna do regular segment work, which is like this other box back here, or if you want to do the staves, you got to have some flat wood that's all the same size to work with. So I ran a bunch of boards through the planer and came up with about 7/8 inch thick to start with, because I knew after I glued them up and I was going to have to do some sanding and planing. On the regular segments, those are 3/4 inches tall by, I think I cut them 7/8 inches wide. And then when I do the staves, they're about the same thickness as that. And so the next step is just to rip everything down on the table saw. I've got my guard off just because a lot of these were thin, and if I'm being honest, I really have it on. So that's what the yellow finger saver is for there. And oddly enough, I've never had I shouldn't say a table saw accident, but I did catch my finger on my miter saw while I was doing this, but the blade was not under power. It was just slowing down, and I still kind of got a gash there. But you'll see, if you notice, my right index finger in some of these has got a nice Band-Aid wrapped around it. But that was a really stupid thing I did that day. After you do that, you got to get rid of that rip blade in your table saw, and you want a good cross-cutting blade. Denny just so happened to bring in his wedgie sled tonight. That's what we have here. There's plans online to make one of those for your table saw. You'll see in a second how that works. And then you make yourself a zero clearance insert there. There's different ways to do that. Just like everything I'm showing you tonight, there's, not necessarily is this the best way, this is the way I do it. So that little zero clearance plate also has a little ramp on it, so that as the pieces come off of there, they just fall to the side and you don't have to worry about kickback. And you can usually do, I don't know, depending on the size of the pieces you're cutting off there, usually you can do 10 or 12 before you have to clear them out of there. Now I'm just setting the fence up with the little, that's my measurement block there, so that I know how far away, which these are, I think, 1 3/4 inch long pieces. I'm just kind of testing it there. And then notice with that little ramp piece, they just kind of fall away and they kind of keep pushing each other down. And like I said, you can probably do yourself 10 or 12 before that's all fills up there. And then I usually just take a push stick and shove them out of there if I'm still cutting a piece. Otherwise, if I'm switching pieces, that's a good chance to clear them. And so in the end here, you might end up cutting, depending on how many you're doing, you might do this about 200 times. So people will say to you, I don't have the patience for segmented turning. Well, there's two kinds of patience, right? There's the kind of patience where you cut something 100 times, or there's the kind of patience where you cut something once and then you wait 6 months for it to dry, right? And that's, choose your patience, right? But either way, you're gonna have to have a little bit of patience, okay? So after you cut those, you're gonna glue up your rings. Again, this is my method. If you want to see another method, go back and watch Dale Hupp's video that we did. Again, with our equipment, I went to Dale's 2 or 3 weekends in a row, I think. I went out to Dale's house and we filmed that one. Dale has a nice little jig set up where he can, he glues his a little bit differently, a couple at a time, and clamps them into place. This is my method. There's a good shot on my index finger of waterproof bandage, holding it all together. And I found the older I get, the longer it takes that stuff to heal. So once you get your rings all glued up, again, this is how I do it. I put a hose clamp on there and cinch everything down. Now you can have a clamp like this one that's close to the size, but then you've got to have a whole bunch of different sizes of hose clamps, and it seems like they're never quite right. Or this one that I'm using here, that thing goes from about 2.5 inches in diameter up to 12 inches in diameter, and I think they're like $6.99 for 2 of them at Menards. I've been using these same ones. If you look at them, you can't really see in the video. They're all caked up with glue, and and I've been using them forever. So they last quite a while, but it's a little bit of an investment if you want to go out and buy a half dozen of them or something. After that, wipe down all the squeeze out there, and that does raise the grain on the ring a little bit, but then you're going to sand it down anyway before you put it together. And again, my method, if you want to decide which is the best way or how you want to do it, Dale's got his own method there, and he puts them together and then sands them on the lathe itself, and that's another good way to do it. So now we've got all our rings glued up. I usually let them sit overnight before I do anything else with them. I at least let them sit overnight. I think, Dale, you only let yours sit a couple hours, don't you? And then go ahead and go at it. Part of these hose clamps are they'll stick to them and you got to kind of wrench them off there, so I really just like it to be dry. Then I run them through the drum sander. If you don't have a drum sander, there's a video on our YouTube page for this little segmented bowl kits that I was talking about earlier, where I show you how to just use a disc sander on your lathe, like a 12-inch that I made myself, and you can certainly get them pretty flat doing that. You just got to make sure you even pressure as you're doing that. And I will tell you, dust goes everywhere with that method, so just be prepared. But I did it that way for a couple years before I had got myself a drum sander. That was some Black Friday sale I just couldn't pass up. Credit card was burning a hole in my pocket, I think. But it's been a really handy thing to have. I'll say that. So once you feed them through there, then you're going to start stacking them together. And I did this by eye because these are all the same size. I think if you watch that segmented bowl video on the YouTube channel, Then I draw a circle on each one that's as close to the next, so I can kind of line everything up. But here, and by the way, that's probably a little bit too much glue. You're going to get some pretty good squeeze out with that. There's God's glue spreader. All of us, most of us, unless we've had that table saw accident, have those. And then this little press I made, I've used this hundreds of times now. There's a plan for this. I think it's on the Woodcraft site. If you just search like Woodcraft glue press, you'll find they make a video. Mine's slightly different than the one they made, but frankly, I thought theirs was a little over-engineered, and so I skipped a couple of the things they said to do, and I've never had any problems with this one. So once you get them lined up and then you mash them down. Now this is where I will wait 45 minutes or an hour and then move on to the next one. The glue's usually set up enough. So typically I might put this in and, the evening, go and watch a hour-long show with my wife, run back downstairs and put the next one on, go back upstairs. And you just keep building. You'll notice when you look at this one, the pattern shifts. It was going this way, and now it's going this way. There was a few curse words said when I figured out the first one, and then I was like, well, because if you flip them over upside down, then if you have 4 segments and you do it wrong, it doesn't work out. But this almost looks like it was intended. So you can recover from that. But I just kept building it up until we got all of them put together. And then once I have that whole thing put together, I do let that sit overnight again before I start to turn it. I don't know that that's necessary, but that's how I do it. If you're really pushed for time, if you're impatient, you can probably get away with that, because I think the way Dale's got a really good video that we put together on YouTube of his method, and he shows you how he does them incrementally instead of stacking them all at once like this, and give you just another idea, and you choose which way you want to do it. So go ahead.
Does that press keep, like, first of all, when you put glue on it, it has a tendency,
So the folks at home can hear you.
when you first put glue on, a lot of times it has a tendency, as soon as you start trying to clamp it, it wants to slide sideways on you.
Yep.
Does that press also do that, or
That press comes like straight down, but what I usually do, the more glue you use, the more it slides around. It's like a fine line. You don't want to starve it, but you don't want too much. But even if you just wait a minute or two before, and get them lined up where you want, and then wait a minute or two, that seems to eliminate that sliding quite a bit. Mm-hmm. Usually it stays in place pretty well for me.
You let that, like you were talking about, if you put that glue on, let it set a little bit to just start to get a little bit tacky.
Like a little haze on it or whatever. Yeah, it really helps. And as long it too, like I said, I put a little too much on there. There's 2 problems with too much glue. It'll, first of all, it slides around like that, but second of all, it seeps out and down the middle, and then it'll stick to your press, and then you can have, it's too messy, so you kind of get a feel for how much squeeze, to put on the tube there as you're putting it down there. But any other questions? So then we'll talk about this stave construction. And again, I don't think I mentioned with that wedgie sled, the angle of degree is 15 degrees for a 12 segment circle. Same thing for the stave construction. I use that 15 degree mark, and that's 360 degrees in a circle. Each half being 15 is 30 times 12, 360. There you go. Mr. Hammond never thought I would do that math, but I just did it. So God rest his soul. Here we go. So you dial that thing in. That little digital gauge for whatever, $20 or whatever you get those for is super accurate. So once you get your, I start with an edge there, and then my measurement for these I think was 1 3/4 inches, and if the next ones I do I think will be 1 5/8, because that ends up with just a little bit bigger than 6 inches before you turn it. And so after you turn it, that's like maybe 6.5 inches on the inside. So that's, I would probably make the next ones a little bit smaller. So once we rip those down, here's the first mistake through the magic of editing. You're not gonna see all the cursing and carrying on that went on, because our YouTube channel is not rated R. I'm using some really cheap tape here because the guy that I went to that pepper mill school with years ago said use really cheap tape for this, because cheap masking tape sticks really well. This is the crappiest tape I've ever used in my life, and I threw that away afterwards. And I usually use that frog tape that's green, that's like probably 2 or 3 times as much as other tape, but it is a strong tape and it works really well. So I've got a little guide board there along the bottom just to keep everything lined up. I tried to alternate the best that I could the colors in the wood to just have nice contrast. And then you slap quite a bit of glue in here. And I probably, part of the reason that tape gave out is I might have put too much glue in here. As it starts to, the idea here is just to roll it up into a cylinder, stand it up. It fell apart on me. So now, fortunately though, because these are 1 3/4 inches wide, you can actually just kind of stand them up, which maybe I should have done that to begin with instead of trying to look so cool. But once you get them up there, then you're going to slap some of those big hose clamps on it. And if you look in the middle there, you can kind of see all this squeeze out that you're getting. There's quite a bit. I mean, it gets a little messy. Also, if you'll notice, so there's that white board that's there. That's not my workbench. That's a like 2x4 piece of 1/4 inch thick melamine that $8 at Menards. I've had that for about 5 years. You can wipe it off with water. If it dries on there, you can use like a razor blade and just scrape the glue right off and keep using it. You can see some blue on there from some paint at some point. I throw that on top of my workbench all the time when I'm doing this kind of work. And then again, I try to clean off a lot of that glue. Not necessarily for any other reason. If you're going to put this in a chuck later, those globs of glue really get in the way. But it also, that glue really will dull your turning tools really quickly. So I try to get as much off of there as I can. And then there's a little cleanup on the board. Notice the big Band-Aid on the finger. Glue kind of stings when it gets in that open cut. All right. So this is not safe. And I'm going to tell you, I don't know where my head was this day. But there's no center steady on this thing at all. And I'm going along happy as a clam, just trying to feel it out and see how things are going. And I actually got farther than the good Lord should have let me. So I kept turning and just gradually hollowing out. There's not a lot of chips flying there. I was just taking really light cuts, trying to see how that was feeling in there. And then I got it kind of smooth and thought I'd do a little sanding. And then the problem is if you look in there, there's good 3 rows left at the bottom, because with those cold jaws and the opening in there, if you get your tool in there too far, and you can have a really bad situation there that you thought this is dumb. So I always try to leave myself, I don't go much further than halfway in there. And so I'm sanding away, everything's going good. Now I got to flip it around and get to the back side of it. Well, that sanding's exciting. I didn't realize I'd left that many seconds in there. All right, so we're looking at it again. And nobody got hurt here except for my feelings. And about an $80 mistake there because those are no more. And I mean, I debated on whether to show anybody that or not, but I believe that we could all learn from one another and I didn't get hurt, hurt my pride. And it was on me. That's not on the cold jaws. They're not designed to do that. I have a very nice, what I would call one of the best on the market, center steadies, made right over here in Bettendorf, Iowa. And I didn't get it out. I didn't put it on there. And so that's what happened. So I had to wait a week because you can't just buy something at a local store. But now you'll notice I have a long work chuck, which worked fairly well for this. I've never had a long work chuck, but I will say if I was doing this project, I would prefer the cold jaws over the long work chuck. So at some point I'll go buy some more cold jaws. But in order to get that center steady, if you'll notice before, I didn't turn the outside of that. I went to the inside first, and you got to have a round surface on the outside. So once I had that, lo and behold, we got a center steady there, and boy, it worked a lot better.
It didn't mess up your turning, it just broke the cold jaw.
Yeah, thank God. Because I guess that's a testament to that wood glue, right? But I didn't have to start over on the turning. And because it was still in rough, it wasn't rounded on the outside, it was whatever ding or dent there was. I'm sure there was some damage there, but I was able to just turn it away. So now that, you can kind of see the tool, there's some vibration there, but that center steady is, everything's doing. Now this is the way it was supposed to work, So then you sand the inside smooth. Again, being careful not to go to the bottom because this is gripping it from the inside. So I'm really careful about that to try to keep it just that top half that's sticking out. The problem with this, and it's evident if you look really closely at these, is getting it re-centered so that you're not, it's perfectly centered again when you turn it the other way. It's almost impossible. The cold jaws do a much better job. This long work chuck has some really spongy type gripper things that, again, that's what it's designed. It's designed to hold a bowl to finish the bottom, not to really do this. And I'm using it, kind of off practice, if you will, or off script. But, I was able to get this done. All right. Turning the staves is really not much different. The difference is the grain orientation of the wood. It's tougher to turn these staves, especially on the inside, than it is. It's spindle turning, more or less, which on the outside goes pretty smoothly, but when you're going on the inside, it's like, cutting with a chainsaw lengthwise, doing all those things. It's just, it's tougher to do. But other than that, it's very similar. It's a similar process. You see the shavings are different, obviously. When you're doing the segmented turning, they come off at nice ribbons. Here, it's just a rougher go to do it. And again, like I'm getting kind of close there to our pins at the end. That's about as close as I would want them to get. You'll have a real problem. I've never had it happen, but I know what'll happen if it gets into that. You just want to be safe about it. And then here's where I had to flip it around because of that, and It's easier on the outside because you can use that cone center to kind of help recenter it, but when you're doing the inside and you're gripping it from the inside, it's tougher to get it. And if you run your hand down the inside of these, there's a little wave to them, and that's part of why. It's because just trying to get it centered back up. And if you don't have a center steady at home, there's one here that fits these 16-inch lathes back here. There's one in the closet back there, so if you want to come in on an open turning, or if you're sitting there thinking, because gee, that's nice, but I don't have that, you could come down here to the club and use it. It's what it's there for. So it frustrates me when I watch a demo and, oh, now I gotta go buy this, or I gotta buy that, and I don't have it, but the club does have this available to you. This is just putting a recess in the bottom, and like I said, I was kind of pressed for time getting all of these done in time. I had a stressful weekend. So I did not put a capture ring in there. It's a glued in plywood bottom, which definitely is not as fancy, but it gets the job done. And I don't know if it was a couple years ago, if it was Dan Gascoigne, or who it was, but they actually, I think, said they used silicone to put theirs in the bottom, which I tend to make a mess if I use silicone or anything like that. So. For the bottoms, it's pretty, again, this is how I do it. You figure out your own method. Some people have a circle cutter that they'll use on the bandsaw. I just have some waste blocks that I use that are flat. I put some double-sided tape on there, and that's, I rough cut those pieces of plywood with just a little jigsaw. And then put them on there, and that'll stick. That's just like 1/4-inch plywood. It's kind of actually flexible, and it sticks on there pretty good. But I brought up a tailstock, and that's just a little scrap piece of that. I forget the name of that plastic, that hard white plastic. It's real slick. What is it? There you go. There you go. That's Steve Sinner's scrap material that he's brought in here. HDPE, all right. He'll bring in every once in a while some scraps that he's got from making his cone centers and that, and put them in a raffle, and I've won those a couple of times, and I've found all kinds of uses for that stuff. This is just one of them. So once you use your calipers or whatever you want to do there, you can just keep bringing your piece up to it till you get to the right size. Then I think we just smooth it off here. Looks like we're ready. Put a little sandpaper to it. And when you take something like this off of there, there I'm trying the actual piece because I didn't believe my calipers for some reason. You can flip that around and sand both sides of it. It doesn't have to necessarily be centered up exactly. You don't have to worry about that. Prying it off of there sometimes can be problematic, but again, that plywood's pretty flexible, as you can see. So that's putting the bottoms in. Next is the tops. This is just a chunk of walnut. And I put that little wedge piece of, that's Purple Heart, I think, under there just to keep that bandsaw blade from catching it like a little log, You gotta be really careful. You ever try to cut something round like that, it'll do a number on you. So I just kind of ripped those in half, and then sanded those. I ran those through my drum sander to kind of sand them flat. And then got pretty close to a center. One thing you can't see, you'll see it in a little bit, is this waste block that I'm using here has a little 5/8 inch hole in it. And then that's the size of what I use at the bottom of the knob. But then that also, I take a little piece of 5/8 inch dowel, and when I drill a hole in the top, and then to recenter it, when I turn it around, put that piece of dowel in there, get you pretty close to center that way. So you can work on both sides of the piece. So again, that's just that double stick tape, man. If you can get a hold of some good double stick tape, you can use it for a lot of stuff. And then you just kind of take it down to round. I'll tell you, looking at these up here, the one on this segmented box, I left it too big. I don't really like the way that looks. I don't know. I don't know that I'm going to change it at this point, but I would have probably made it a little closer to the size, just because it's the way I like it. So I took a rough measurement there to see how close I wanted to get it, and then just kept working it down. And then at some point I determined the thickness, just eyeballing what I wanted it to do, and then kind of parted down the backside so I could put a round over edge on that. It's just like turning a bowl or anything else. You got to worry about tear out on that end grain as it's coming around there, and I did kind of struggle with that a little bit, again, because I haven't really been turning. And then I popped my 5/8 inch hole in there, sanded it flat, and then we flipped it around. And there's a better shot of that hole in the block that I'm using to tape that stuff to, and I put a little dowel in there. Feed it in there, and then you're pretty close to being centered with that. And then again, I was figuring out where I want, based on the size of the box, where I want that internal dimension to be. And then used a parting tool to get myself down there close. And I think I used a little detail gouge to kind of firm it up, and then sand it up. And there's your top. And then the last thing is putting the little handle on the top with the button in the middle. And again, this is how I did it. There's multiple ways to do this, and again, I kind of struggled with some of this because I just haven't done this turned in a while, and my fine motor skills were definitely lacking at times. And the other thing you'll see here in a little bit is the size for that bead is 13/16, which is kind of an odd size. I didn't have a Forstner bit. I think every year that I've done these, I said, I'm going to buy a Forstner bit that size. And then I don't, and I end up using a spade bit, which is not a good, it works. It worked, but I'll have to put that on my phone reminder next time I'm up at Woodcraft or wherever to go in and buy a Forstner bit that's that size. So again, you choose how fancy you want your knob on the top, but I kind of go to that shape just because I imagine, especially somebody that might have dexterity problems or other things from chemotherapy or for surgeries or whatever, it's the easiest thing for somebody to maybe latch on to. And you can see from me turning that around, it's just got a little wobble to it. It's not real true, but There's your spade bit going in, which again is just not the cleanest hole. And you see it's got a little bit of play to it, and it's because of that little bit of wobble and a crappy bit that I was using. And then sand that up, and then I use that glue that I showed you earlier to glue that bead in place. And then I put a little masking tape on that while I'm applying my finish. Now, which is finish, the last thing. That's all I have for videos, Alex. Thanks. The finish that I put on this, normally I like to use Steve Sinner's method. I didn't have the time to do that, and I didn't feel like using those that Longworth chuck to hold this on the lathe like that was gonna work out. So I think I'm gonna take these home and buff them a little bit. So what I did was used a wipe-on poly first, because I like what that oil-based products usually do to the wood, give it kind of that warm amber glow. So I did that, but then I also didn't want to put on 10 coats of it because, again, I was doing this Saturday, trying to finish these 3 boxes. So I had some waterborne finish that I put over the top of that, and it's 3 coats maybe of that I put on there. That stuff's really easy to apply. It dries quickly. It doesn't color the wood nicely. I don't like putting that on raw wood. It does raise the grain. You gotta, put light sanding in between. And then the final thing is just never quite as smooth, I don't think, with that. But if you buff it, it comes out pretty well. So I might take these back home and buff them. But I think if you look, I struggled with a couple of things on this one. If you were to look at the inside, and if you looked really closely, maybe there's a little bit of tool mark around here, and it's because when I would turn it around on that Longworth chuck, I just could never get it exactly centered again, so I was trying to blend that in from back and forth. So that's just something you might struggle with. This piece of wood also, I don't know if this was elm or, I don't know, I think Jerry gave me this at some point. But this was a crotch piece of wood, and as I got into it, there was a nice seam kind of rotten right through there. So I filled that in with some epoxy, which is something I haven't worked a lot with. That was just kind of a stick and hope. But this one, what's that?
We're accusing him of giving you a rotten piece.
Yeah, Jerry gives you real crappy wood sometimes.
He didn't give you anything good, come on.
Well, the price, I believe, was free, so it's hard to complain about that. So that's what I came up with here. If you're interested in these, I've got wood for this. I've also got a little bit of cherry and walnut if you want like a solid wood type thing. This type, you either like this or you don't, right? I mean, it's just a design thing. To me, I like it. Redheads, you like them or you don't, right? That's just your personal preference. And my wife likes these, so I'll make whatever. She thinks it looks cool, and we all defer to our better half when we want to survive. So that's those. If you want some, let me know, and I'll bring them down here. I'll cut them up, and then the club can decide how they want to handle the rest of that. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I got one, Bill.
Go ahead.
Have you tried, instead of having to use a Longworth or the type of holding that you did there, have you tried gluing a waste block on to start with, and then use a chuck?
So that very first one, I think that I showed you, that's what I did.
Okay.
I did use this. Let me see here. That's how I did this one. I glued that right onto that waste block and let her fly, and that worked pretty well. I didn't even have a center steady at that point, and Now, mind you, that one is only, what is that, 6 or 7 rings high. So, you know, this one's 3, 6, 10, right? So the further out you get, you know, you get more pressure there, and just the I'm not an engineer, but there's more force, you know, easier to rip it off of there. So you can definitely do it that way. And I would say, I get it, not everybody has a center steady. If you have a MIDI lathe, that one that I made in an afternoon, you know, I think a Saturday, I made that thing Saturday afternoon maybe and put it all together. And there's plans all over the internet for making one. I just don't think I would trust the strength of that on a bigger lathe. The bigger that circle gets, and you know, but that's why there's one here. That's why the club. I mean, the club. For those of you who don't know, there's some interesting things in that closet back there. There's a vacuum pump back there if you want to do vacuum chucking and you want to play around with that. If you don't, before you invest in it at home, because I think to buy a vacuum pump is, you know, $250, $300 last time I looked. And there's one right back there that you can use, you know, to play around with that before you decide if that's what you want to do. So there's the whole hollowing rig is back there that fits these. It's not for this lathe, right, Steve? It's for those. Yeah, for the jets back there. So, I mean, but if you want to play around with hollowing and you know, make a vase or other hollow form, but you don't want to invest in all that, once you do it, I think you will be, you know, wanting to invest in it. But you can use all that here at the club. That's what it's for. Anything else? All right.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Yep.